So this is a paper about how companies can source knowledge from outside the firm by seconding their employees to an alliance partner to work on a joint project. So for example, Nissan Renault has an exchange program for their employees with 3 other automobile manufacturers. Or Brazilian Vale and Japanese firm Mitsui have an immersion program for their employees. And at the extreme, some companies even go so far as to second their employees to humanitarian sector partners in emerging markets. And their reasoning is that they'll be exposed to more challenging contexts and also different ways of doing things. So for instance, global logistics provider TNT, they seconded over a 10-year period almost 600 of their employees to work on joint projects, close to 300 of them, with the United Nations World Food Program in 43 emerging market countries. Now, for these alliance secondments to be successful, it actually requires these individual employees, first of all, to learn under very unfamiliar conditions, what I call the spin-out phase, but then also to reintegrate the knowledge that they've acquired back into the company when they come back. And this is what I call the spin-in phase. The problem is we don't really understand yet how these types of individual level processes contribute to alliance outcomes. And that's what this paper is about. So I use archival, interview, and survey data from both TNT and the World Food Program to try to explain, first of all, what can foster employee learning during this spin-out phase, but then also what might hinder reintegration during the spin-in phase. So what I find is, first of all, that in order for employees to learn from these radically different organizational and operational contexts requires very tight coordination with their alliance partners. So they have to really work as a team, both making decisions together and implementing them together, as opposed to, say, working autonomously and then putting everything together at the end. The reason for this is that this tight coordination can both reduce prejudice between the partners, so this feeling of us versus them. It can also help employees understand better what kinds of knowledge they can access through their partners, but also where it's located. And finally, it can also help them find creative ways of recombining their different approaches. However, this level of tight coordination that's necessary for learning is actually detrimental to reintegration in 2 different ways. So it has 2 unintended consequences. The first is that this type of tight coordination creates learning that is actually very difficult to decontextualize and then translate for your colleagues when you come back into the company. So somewhat paradoxically, the more you learn in these projects or alliance secondments, the more reintegration difficulties you're going to tend to experience afterwards. Now, the second unintended consequence actually reinforces this, because the tight coordination that is required for learning is actually going to create shifts in the way that employees perceive what it means to be a part of the company. And so when they come back, their sense of what it is to be an employee is going to be misaligned with their colleagues. And in particular, for them, the importance of their role as part of this alliance is going to be different than what it is for their colleagues potentially. Fortunately, I find also that this effect can be dampened when managers actually foster a sense that employee secondments, these alliance secondments experiences are really valued by the company. So finally, I also test out the original premise of the paper, that for firms to actually benefit from these alliance secondments, employees not only need to learn during alliance secondments, they also need to reintegrate what they've learned when they come back. What I found was really intriguing. So secondment managers at TNT, I found that they actually initially evaluated the success of alliance secondments exclusively based on the amount of employee learning that happened in the field during projects. But over time, you could see them actually start to realize that this reintegration phase was also important and increasingly come to incorporate it in their evaluations of alliance secondments. And actually, what eventually happened was that they even gained such a nuanced understanding of the whole process that the reintegration difficulties that they sometimes saw were actually factored in positively in their evaluations of alliance secondments. And so in a way, they sort of realized that this was a bit of a no pain, no gain situation, and that reintegration difficulties might be indicative of a deeper learning experience. So really over a 10-year time period, we're seeing this effect of experience as managers really come to have a more nuanced understanding of the entire process and really understand the entire cycle. So the phenomenon is a real-life phenomenon. The research was really done jointly with TNT and the United Nations World Food Program with the help of the INSEAD Social Innovation Center. So it really already is a paper that's very much grounded in the real world, and so the findings are already pretty directly applicable. But beyond alliance secondments, I think we could also think about how the findings might apply to different kinds of contexts where employees are asked to learn their familiar working environment. Especially when they're going into more complex, turbulent, or geographically, institutionally, or culturally distant environments, or when they're just working with partners that are very different from them. And even without leaving the firm, you could think about a multinational corporation where you could also see similar kinds of things playing out. For example, when you have scouting units or virtual teams, or even in your relationships with your subsidiaries. And in fact, we could also think about broader applications as more and more firms are using knowledge or project or team-based work. So you could think about the creative industries or the professional service firms. So my broader research agenda focuses on cross-sector partnerships between private sector, public sector, and nonprofit sector organizations as a way to create value in emerging markets, both for the organizations that are involved and for the societies that they evolve in. So there's actually a follow-up project that I'm working on right now with INSEAD colleagues, Professor Luc van Wassenhove and Julien Clément, where we're actually doing a study of the North Star Alliance, which is a foundation that TNT and the World Food Program helped to create through their own partnership together. It actually sets up and manages health clinics along African transport corridors to reach mobile populations that are at risk of HIV and AIDS. So for example, truck drivers or commercial sex workers. And what we're trying to do in this study is try to understand, first of all, how in a multinational organization that crosses borders, such as this one, how do you actually foster internal collaboration between members of the organization in order to spread best practices about how you can establish these cross-sector partnerships and how you can manage them. And then we're also trying to look at then in turn, how do these combinations of very diverse partners help you reach populations that are difficult to access in these parts of the world?